The store manager didn't call security. He didn't call corporate. He called the police. On a packed Saturday afternoon on Michigan Avenue, with sunlight bouncing off glass storefronts and tourists drifting in and out with shopping bags, a calm black woman stood near a display of leather handbags that cost more than most people's rent. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't touching anything. She wasn't stealing. She was waiting. "Sir?" she said evenly, her voice low but clear. "I just asked to see the authentication papers." Marcus Sterling felt his jaw tighten. He had managed this boutique for 6 years, long enough to believe he could spot who belonged and who didn't. He wore that confidence the way he wore his tailored suit, tight practiced and unquestioned. The woman in front of him didn't look desperate. That bothered him. She didn't look impressed either. That bothered him more. "These items are very exclusive," he said, forcing a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "We don't usually." "I understand," she replied. "I work with supply chains. I like to know what I'm buying." That was the moment the air shifted. 2 sales associates had already noticed her when she walked in. Noticed her the way people notice something they don't expect to see in a familiar place. One had subtly moved closer. Another had stopped folding scarves, pretending to tidy the same shelf for the 3rd time. Customers glanced up, then away the way people do when they sense discomfort, but don't want to name it. Marcus felt the stares. He felt the control slipping. "Ma'am," he said a little louder now, "if you're not prepared to make a purchase, I'm going to have to ask you to move along." She met his eyes, calm, unflinching. "I am prepared to make a purchase," she said. "I'm not prepared to buy a lie." That word landed hard. Marcus straightened. "I don't feel comfortable with how this is going," he said, turning slightly so others could hear. "You're causing a disturbance." A man near the register frowned. A woman by the window raised her phone. Elena Vance did not raise her voice. She did not explain herself again. She did not apologize. "I'll wait," she said. Marcus stepped away, pulled out his phone, and dialed. His voice dropped into something rehearsed official. "Yes, hello. I'm the manager at a retail location on Michigan Avenue. I have a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises. I don't feel safe." That word again. Safe. When he hung up, Elena looked at him. Not angry, not afraid. Just disappointed. "You didn't call corporate," she said softly. "You didn't call your regional director. You didn't even call store security." Marcus shrugged. "I'm protecting my business." Around them, phones were up now. Someone whispered, "Did he just call the cops?" Another voice muttered, "For what?" The store no longer felt like a sanctuary of luxury. It felt like a stage. Elena stood still, hands relaxed at her sides. Her coat was neatly pressed. Her shoes were clean. Everything about her suggested control intention and restraint. She looked like someone who was used to being listened to and used to waiting when she wasn't. "I've been doing this work for 20 years, she said, not to Marcus, but to the room. "I audit global supply chains. I help companies avoid lawsuits, recalls, and scandals." Marcus laughed sharp and dismissive. "That's nice." She turned back to him. "What's not nice is selling counterfeit goods as authentic. What's not nice is charging people luxury prices for chemically treated leather that fails safety standards." A murmur rippled through the store. "That's a serious accusation," Marcus snapped. So is calling the police on someone because they don't look the way you expect your customers to look, she replied. Outside sirens cut faintly through the city noise. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. On the same week, the city had announced a crackdown on retail fraud and unethical sourcing. A store manager had chosen to escalate a quiet conversation into a police matter over a question. Marcus felt sweat gather at the base of his neck. "You're making this worse for yourself," he said. "Just cooperate." Elena nodded once. "I am." She glanced at a phone pointed in her direction. "Please keep recording," she said calmly. "This part matters." The crowd had grown. Shoppers who had nothing to do with handbags now had something to do with justice. Comments popped up on screens in real time. Some defended Marcus. Some didn't. The divide was instant and familiar. Marcus tried to reclaim the room. "Everyone, please. This is private property." "Then why did you call the police?" someone asked. He had no answer that sounded good. Elena's voice cut through the noise, steady and clear. "There's a difference between luxury and legitimacy," she said. "Quiet doesn't mean weak, and asking questions doesn't make someone dangerous." She paused, letting that settle. "I've waited my whole career for people to stop confusing dignity with defiance." The sirens were louder now. Marcus glanced toward the door, then back at her. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Not regret fear. Fear of being seen too clearly. "You don't belong here," he said, under his breath, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Elena heard him. So did everyone else. She exhaled slowly. "That's the mirage," she said. "You think power looks loud? You think it announces itself? You think it needs permission?" She looked around the store at the glass, the lights, the price tags meant to intimidate and exclude. "Real power," she continued, "is knowing the truth and not needing to shout it." The doors opened. Uniforms stepped in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Marcus straightened, relieved and emboldened at once. "Thank God," he said. "She's been causing a scene." One of the officers glanced at Elena, then at Marcus. "Ma'am," he said, measured but firm, "we're going to need you to come with us for a moment." Elena nodded. "Of course." As she stepped forward, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. Somewhere in the city, someone was already on their way. And in that moment, before names were revealed, before titles were spoken, before power fully shifted the illusion still held, Marcus still believed he was in control. The store still believed it was untouchable. The crowd still believed this was just another incident that would fade by tomorrow. They were wrong, because the mirage of power only lasts until the truth walks through the door. The call had already been made. That was the point of no return. Once Marcus Sterling said the words, "I don't feel safe," into his phone, the store stopped being a luxury boutique and became something else entirely. The sentence lingered in the air, like smoke heavier than it should have been heavier, because everyone in the room understood what it meant when a man like him said it about a woman like her. Elena Vance felt the shift immediately. Not fear something colder. A familiar tightening that came from knowing the rules had changed without warning and not in her favor. She stood where she was, palms open, posture relaxed. Every instinct told her not to move too fast, not to look defensive, not to give anyone the satisfaction of calling her agitated. She had learned that lesson long ago. Marcus paced behind the counter, his confidence returning in uneven bursts. Calling the police had done that. It gave him something solid to lean on, a sense of authority that no longer depended on customer service manuals or corporate language. "You really should have just left," he said loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Now it's out of my hands." Elena looked at him. "It never was," she replied. A woman near the front window lifted her phone higher. The red dot appeared. Live. Someone else followed. Then another. "What happened?" a voice asked from the back. "He called the cops on her," someone whispered. "For asking a question." For what another voice shot back. "You don't know the whole story. That was how it always went. Doubt first. Sympathy later, if at all." Marcus noticed the phones and stiffened. "You can't record in here," he said. "You called the police." Elena said calmly, "This stopped being private when you made it public." The store's soft music played on absurdly cheerful against the rising tension. Customers hovered unsure whether to leave or stay drawn in by the gravity of a moment they knew they would later describe to friends as something they'd witnessed. "I've asked you repeatedly to cooperate." Marcus said, his voice tight now. "If you have nothing to hide, this shouldn't be a problem." Elena nodded once. "That phrase," she said, "has never meant what people think it means." She turned, slightly addressing the phones now. "I want to be clear," she said, measured and precise. "I have not been accused of stealing. I have not been accused of threatening anyone. I asked to see documentation for a product. That is all." The comments began scrolling faster. Some supportive, some hostile, a few ugly. Marcus clenched his jaw. "You're twisting this." "No," she said. "I'm documenting it." The sirens were closer now, unmistakable. Someone near the register muttered, "This is getting out of hand." "That's what happens when you escalate," Elena replied without looking at them. Marcus stepped forward. "Lower your voice." She met his eyes. "I haven't raised it." For a moment he looked unsure. Then he did what men like him often did when uncertainty crept in. He doubled down. "You're making my staff uncomfortable," he said. "You're refusing to leave. I don't know what your intentions are." Elena exhaled slowly. "My intentions were to buy a bag," she said. "Now my intention is to stand here until this situation is handled properly." "Properly," he scoffed. "Yes," she said, "by the rules you chose." A man near the door spoke up. "Man, she's not doing anything." Marcus shot him a look. "Sir, I need you to stay out of this." "But you called the cops," the man said. "That makes it everybody's business." The store buzzed with low conversation. No one was browsing anymore. No one cared about handbags. This was about something else now, about how quickly normalcy could crack when authority was misused. Elena felt the weight of the moment pressing in, the old calculation running in her mind. Every move would be interpreted, every word clipped and replayed. She could feel the familiar exhaustion of knowing she had to be perfect simply to be believed. "Please," Marcus said, his voice edged with impatience, "just step outside." She shook her head. "I won't." "Why not?" "Because you don't get to exile people to make yourself comfortable," she said quietly. The sirens stopped. Doors opened somewhere outside. Footsteps approached. Marcus straightened, smoothing his jacket. Relief flashed across his face, followed quickly by vindication. He glanced around, as if expecting the room to fall back into line now that backup had arrived. Elena felt a ripple of tension move through the crowd. Phones angled toward the entrance. The moment everyone had been waiting for was here, whether they were ready for it or not. Two officers stepped inside, scanning the room. Their presence changed the air instantly. Conversations dropped. Bodies stiffened. Authority had arrived. Marcus moved first. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping toward them. "This woman has been causing a disturbance." She refused to leave when asked. One of the officers nodded, listening. The other glanced briefly at Elena, then back to Marcus. Elena noted the order. She always did. "Ma'am," the first officer said, his tone professional but firm, "can you tell me what's going on?" She took a breath. "I asked a question about a product," she said. "The manager called the police." "That's it?" the officer asked. "Yes." Marcus cut in. She was being confrontational. Elena didn't react. She had learned not to interrupt when her credibility was still being measured. The officer looked between them. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to step aside with us for a moment." "For what reason?" she asked. "Just to sort this out." "I'm happy to answer questions right here," she said, "where there are witnesses." A flicker of irritation crossed the officer's face. "If you didn't do anything wrong, this won't be a problem." That sentence landed like a weight. The phones caught it. The crowd heard it. Elena felt it settle deep in her chest. Not surprise, not anger, but the familiar recognition of how easily cooperation was framed as compliance. She nodded slowly. "I understand," she said. "I'd just like it noted that I was asked to leave without cause and that I declined." The officer hesitated. He hadn't expected that level of composure. Around them, the live stream numbers climbed. Marcus watched the exchange, his earlier confidence wavering. This was not the clean resolution he had imagined. The woman hadn't crumbled. The crowd hadn't dispersed. The story hadn't gone his way. Elena stood tall, eyes forward, voice steady. "This is what public exposure looks like," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Not shouting, not chaos, just light. Outside, someone shouted a question. Inside, the officers exchanged a glance. Marcus swallowed hard. The moment had escaped him. What he thought would end the problem had only amplified it. And somewhere beyond the glass walls of the boutique, the city kept moving, unaware that a quiet decision made in seconds had just turned a private bias into a public reckoning. Elena Vance did not raise her voice when the room leaned in. She didn't need to. The moment had shifted again, quieter this time, but sharper. The police were present. The phones were rolling. The easy story Marcus Sterling wanted unruly customer reasonable response had stalled. Silence settled like a held breath. "Since we're all here," Elena set her tone, "even we might as well be precise." Marcus scoffed. "This is a retail dispute," he said, glancing at the officers. "She's trying to turn it into something else." Elena didn't look at him. She reached into her bag and withdrew a slim tablet, the kind used by people who expected to be taken seriously. She tapped the screen once, twice. The glow reflected faintly on the glass cases. "I audit supply chains," she said, addressing the room. "Not occasionally. For a living. My job is to find risk before it becomes scandal." One of the officers shifted his weight. "Ma'am, I'm not accusing anyone yet," Elena said gently. "I'm explaining." She turned the tablet so the nearest phone could see. This bag, she continued, indicating the one that had sparked the original question, is listed as full-grain calfskin from an Italian tannery certified under EU chemical safety standards. Marcus opened his mouth. Elena kept going. "The serial number printed here? she said, zooming in, doesn't match the batch records for that tannery. Not even close. A murmur rippled through the store. Marcus laughed too loud. That's proprietary information. It's publicly traceable, Elena replied. If you know where to look. She tapped again. A new screen appeared dense with data dates, codes, locations. To the untrained eye, it might have looked meaningless. To anyone who worked in manufacturing, it was a map. This serial pattern, she said, matches a facility outside Guangzhou. Not Italy. The leather is chemically treated to mimic softness, but it fails long-term wear tests and can trigger allergic reactions. A woman in the crowd frowned. Are you saying it's fake? I'm saying it's a super clone, Elena said. High-quality counterfeit. The kind that passes a casual inspection and fools consumers who trust the brand. Marcus's face flushed. This is absurd. Elena finally looked at him. What's absurd, she said, is charging $12,000 for a product that costs a fraction of that to produce while exposing customers to materials that wouldn't pass a safety audit. One of the officers raised a hand. Ma'am, are you making a formal accusation? I'm documenting, Elena said. There's a difference. She turned back to the tablet. The hardware, she continued, contains nickel levels above U.S. consumer safety recommendations. The stitching pattern, here she zoomed in again, is inconsistent with the brand's own manufacturing standards from the last 3 seasons. The phones leaned closer. Comments exploded. Marcus took a step forward. You don't get to conduct an investigation in my store. Elena didn't flinch. You invited scrutiny when you called the police. He turned to the officers. You're going to let her do this? The older officer hesitated. The younger one glanced at the screen, then at Marcus. She's not interfering with our process. Marcus's confidence cracked. This is harassment. Elena shook her head. Harassment is calling the police to silence a question. This is information. She paused, letting the words settle. Cheap doesn't just mean fake, she said. Cheap means dangerous. It means corners cut where consumers can't see them. It means workers paid pennies to handle chemicals without protection. It means risk pushed downstream to people who trusted a label. The room was still now. Even Marcus's supporters had quieted. Elena's voice softened, but it carried. People think luxury fraud is victimless because the price tags are high. They assume anyone who shops here can absorb the loss. That's convenient. And wrong. She gestured to the crowd. All it takes is one allergic reaction, one recall, one lawsuit. And suddenly this isn't about handbags anymore. Marcus tried again. You don't know our operations. Elena met his gaze. I know exactly how this works. Authentic inventory arrives. Superclones replace a percentage. Margins jump. Detection is rare. Accountability is slower than profit. His eyes flicked to the tablet. Turn that off. She didn't. Instead, she tapped a final icon. A secure interface, open company logos, time-stamped credentials. I've initiated a live audit, Elena said calmly. My firm is logging this in real time. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Marcus stepped back, as if the floor had shifted beneath him. You can't do that. I can, she said. And I just did. The officers exchanged a look. Ma'am, one said carefully, you're saying this store is engaged in fraud? I'm saying there's probable cause to investigate, Elena replied. And now there's a record. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. Elena watched him not with triumph, but with something closer to fatigue. "No," she said. "This is predictable." She turned back to the crowd. "We live in a world where prestige is trusted more than evidence, where asking for proof is seen as aggression, where silence is rewarded." Her gaze moved briefly to the phones. "This is what transparency looks like. Not loud, not theatrical. Just facts." One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "we're going to need to take a closer look at this." Marcus's voice wavered. "She set me up." Elena shook her head. "You set yourself up the moment you chose power over professionalism." The younger officer leaned closer to the screen. "These records," he said, "they're legit. They're time-stamped and verifiable," Elena said. "Anyone can cross-check them." Marcus's shoulders sagged. The room no longer belonged to him. The story had slipped free of his control, not through shouting or force, but through clarity. Elena powered down the tablet and slipped it back into her bag. "I didn't come here to make a scene," she said quietly. "I came here to buy a product I could trust." She looked at Marcus one last time. "And to remind you that knowledge is a kind of power you can't escort out." The phones kept rolling. The officers stood silent. The store, once a fortress of glass and price tags, felt suddenly exposed, its authority stripped bare by facts that refused to be ignored. And in that stillness, something irreversible had begun. The officers stood closer now, not because the room demanded it, but because the situation did. Authority had a way of tightening its circle when uncertainty crept in. The boutique no longer felt like a place of commerce. It felt like a checkpoint, everyone aware that something heavier than handbags was being weighed. Marcus Sterling sensed the shift before he understood it. The certainty he had leaned on since dialing 911 was thinning, replaced by a dull pressure behind his eyes. He had expected the police to reset the balance to restore order the way uniforms often did. Instead, they were listening, watching, thinking. "Sir," the older officer said, measured and cautious, "we're going to need some documentation." Marcus blinked. "For what the merchandise?" the officer replied. "And your sourcing records." Marcus laughed, but it came out wrong. "This is ridiculous. She's not even the door open." No announcement, no dramatic pause, just the quiet sound of polished shoes on tile. A man stepped inside, tall, composed, dressed plainly, for someone who could have commanded more attention if he wanted to. His coat was still buttoned, his expression unreadable. He scanned the room the way someone does when they're trained to take in details without reacting to them. Elena noticed him immediately, not because she was waiting for rescue. She wasn't. But because she recognized the way the air changed when certain people entered a space, not louder, not brighter, just more deliberate. He stopped a few feet from her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded once. "I'm fine." The officers turned. Marcus frowned. "Sir, this is an active situation." The man met his gaze calmly. "So I see." He turned to the officers. "May I ask why my wife is being detained?" The word landed softly. "Wife." Marcus's face drained of color so fast it was almost imperceptible, like a screen dimming. He opened his mouth, closed it, then swallowed. The older officer stiffened. "Your wife?" The man nodded. "Elena Vance." Recognition flickered slow, then sharp. One of the officers straightened immediately. Mr. Mayor. Julian Vance inclined his head. Officers. The room froze. Phones wavered, then steadied again. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice murmured, "That's the mayor." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. The pieces rearranged themselves in his mind too late to stop the outcome. The calm woman, the precision, the refusal to back down, the timing. He had not just misjudged a customer. He had summoned the city's highest authority into his own wrongdoing. Julian Vance did not raise his voice. He didn't scold. He didn't demand apologies. He simply stood beside his wife, a quiet presence that made everything else feel suddenly exposed. "What's the nature of the complaint?" he asked. Marcus tried to speak. Nothing came out. The older officer cleared his throat. The store manager reported a disturbance. Julian glanced at Elena. "Did you cause one?" She shook her head. "I asked a question." Julian nodded. "That tracks." Marcus found his voice at last. "This is a conflict of interest," he said quickly. "You can't." Julian raised a hand not sharply, just enough. "I'm not intervening," he said. "I'm asking for clarity." He looked at the officers. "And I trust you to proceed as you would if I weren't standing here." That was the sentence that sealed it. Because suddenly there was no escape route, no claim of favoritism, no narrative that cast him as a victim of influence. Julian Vance had not come to pull strings. He had come to remove them. The younger officer gestured toward Elena's bag. "She's presented documentation suggesting potential fraud." Julian's eyes flicked briefly to the tablet she had already put away. "Is that so?" Marcus shook his head, desperation creeping in. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." Julian looked at him for the first time. Really looked. "Then this will be easy to clear up," he said. Silence pressed in. Outside, traffic moved as usual. Inside, time slowed. Julian turned to the officers again. "I'd like to remind everyone," he said evenly, "that this city is currently conducting an active investigation into retail fraud and unethical sourcing." Marcus flinched. He knew. Everyone in the industry knew. Press conferences, task forces, warnings. And still, he had chosen this moment, this woman. The officers exchanged another glance. "Sir," the older one said to Marcus, "we're going to need full access to your inventory and records." Marcus's voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding." Julian tilted his head slightly. Those tend to resolve themselves quickly when there's nothing to hide. Elena watched her husband with quiet appreciation. Not because he was powerful, but because he was restrained. He wasn't shielding her. He wasn't rescuing her. He was letting the system face itself. Marcus felt eyes on him from every angle. Customers, staff, cameras. The authority he once wielded like a blunt instrument now felt brittle in his hands. "This isn't fair," he muttered. Elena spoke then softly but clearly. "Neither was calling the police on me." Julian turned to her. "Do you want to leave?" She shook her head. "Not yet." The officers began moving with purpose now. Radios crackled. Requests were made. Procedures initiated. The situation had crossed a threshold no longer personal, no longer manageable. Marcus backed toward the counter, his mind racing for an exit that no longer existed. He had believed power was about who you could summon. He had been wrong. Power was about what you could withstand when summoned yourself. Julian addressed the officers once more. "Please continue," he said. "I'll remain available if you need clarification on city policy." Then he did something Marcus hadn't expected. He stepped aside. No spotlight, no command, just space. The message was unmistakable. The process mattered more than the man. Elena felt the weight of the moment settle not as triumph, but as gravity. This was never about embarrassing someone. It was about revealing what already existed, hidden behind glass and assumptions. Marcus stood very still as the reality closed in. The story had outrun him. The narrative he tried to control now belonged to the city, to the public, to the systems he thought he could bend without consequence. Julian looked at him one last time. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with disappointment. And in that quiet, devastating absence of theatrics, the shadow of real authority fell not to crush, but to expose. The reckoning did not arrive with shouting or sirens. It came quietly, the way consequences often do, once there was nowhere left to hide. By the time the officers finished securing the store's inventory and contacting their supervisors, the boutique had emptied of customers. The glass doors were locked from the inside. Phones were still out, but no one was speaking much anymore. The spectacle had passed. What remained was gravity. Marcus Sterling sat on a low bench near the fitting room's elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might offer a way out. His phone buzzed in his hand again and again. He didn't answer it at first. Then he did. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "I know." A pause. His face tightened. "No, I didn't think another pause. Longer this time." "They're saying what?" He listened, eyes unfocused. When he finally lowered the phone, his hand was shaking. Across the room, Elena Vance stood beside her husband, not touching him, not leaning on him. She didn't need to. What she needed now was distance, not from him, but from the moment. She had learned over the years that the aftermath was where the real cost revealed itself. The older officer approached Marcus again, his tone no longer tentative. "Sir, based on the information provided and what we're seeing here, you're being detained, pending further investigation." Marcus looked up slowly. "Detained for what fraud?" the officer said, "and potential consumer safety violations." Marcus laughed once sharp and hollow. "This is insane. This started because I called you about her." Elena met his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "This started because you lied." The officer guided Marcus to his feet. The cuffs clicked softly louder in the silence than they ever sounded in movies. Someone in the corner gasped. A sales associate wiped away tears, unsure whether they were from shock or relief. As Marcus was led toward the back, his phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a name he recognized immediately. His wife. "Please," he said, his voice breaking as he turned back toward Elena. "I was just trying to survive." The words hung there raw and exposed. Elena didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was steady, not cruel. "So was everyone who trusted you," she said. Outside, a marked vehicle waited. The doors closed, the engine started, and just like that, the man who once controlled the room disappeared into the machinery of accountability. The fallout came fast after that. Corporate headquarters called within the hour. The franchise license was suspended immediately pending full review. Accounts were frozen. Inventory was seized. A statement was drafted before the store's sign even went dark. Elena watched the process unfold without satisfaction. Justice, she knew, was not supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel final. Julian stood nearby fielding calls with the calm precision of someone used to crises. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He let the facts do the work. "This isn't about favoritism," he said into one call. "It's about standards." When it was over, when the officers had left and the lights were dimmed, Elena stepped outside. Michigan Avenue looked the same as it always did, bright, busy, and different. Shoppers walked past the darkened storefront, glancing briefly at the paper notice taped to the glass before moving on. For a moment, Elena stood there breathing in the cool air. A woman approached her hesitantly. "I saw the whole thing," she said. "I didn't say anything earlier. I should have." Elena smiled faintly. "Next time," she said. "That's how change works." Another passerby stopped. "Thank you," he said simply. Elena nodded. Gratitude was welcome, but it wasn't the point. Later that evening, the videos spread. Headlines followed. Opinions clashed. Some people argued Marcus had been unfairly targeted. Others insisted this was long overdue. The internet did what it always did: simplified, sensationalized, moved on. But the record remained. The next morning, Elena sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through messages from colleagues, regulators, journalists. She answered only a few. The rest could wait. Julian poured coffee and slid a mug toward her. "You okay?" She considered the question. "I'm tired," she said. "But yes." He nodded. "They'll try to make this about us." "They always do," she replied. Elena looked out the window, thinking not about the store, but about the countless moments like it that never made the news. The quiet compromises, the unchecked assumptions, the times people swallowed discomfort because pushing back felt too expensive. She stood and walked back to the table, resting her hands on the surface. "People think prejudice is just an attitude," she said. "They don't see the invoice." Julian watched her listening. "It costs trust," she continued. "It costs safety. It costs integrity. And eventually, it costs money. Careers. Freedom." She picked up her phone, scrolling past one final comment that stopped her cold. Someone had written, "If she wasn't married to the mayor, none of this would have happened." Elena set the phone down gently. "That's the lie," she said. "This happened because someone asked the wrong question to the wrong person at the wrong time." Julian reached for her hand. "What do you want to do now?" She thought of Marcus's face when the cuffs closed, of the sales associates who would lose their jobs, of the consumers who would never know what they'd almost been sold. "I want people to understand the real price," she said. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you bought a lie because it was cheaper," she continued, "ask yourself, who paid the real price?" Later that week, the store remained dark. The sign was removed. A for-lease notice replaced the branding that once promised exclusivity and elegance. Life went on, but somewhere in boardrooms, in back offices, in training sessions, and compliance meetings, the story resurfaced not as gossip, but as warning. A reminder that dignity was not optional, that assumptions were liabilities, that power borrowed from prejudice always came due. And for those who had watched, who had filmed, who had stood silently or spoken up, the question lingered long after the news cycle moved on. If no one powerful had walked through that door, would the truth still have mattered? Elena believed it would. It had to. Because the bill for prejudice doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It waits. What happened inside that boutique on Michigan Avenue was never just about a handbag, a store manager, or even a single phone call to the police. It was about how power is perceived, how dignity is tested, and how easily bias hides behind routine decisions. Elena Vance walked into that store expecting a transaction. She walked out, having exposed a system that relied on silence assumptions and the belief that no one would ever ask the wrong question at the wrong time. Marcus Sterling believed authority came from position, from being the one behind the counter, from deciding who belonged and who didn't. In his mind, order meant control, and control meant safety. But when that control was challenged not with anger, not with disruption, but with knowledge, it collapsed. His mistake wasn't just calling the police. It was assuming that the rules would bend for him because they always had before. Elena never raised her voice. She never demanded special treatment. She didn't weaponize emotion or status. She relied on something far more dangerous to fragile systems' facts. By refusing to shrink by documenting instead of reacting, she shifted the balance without ever needing to announce who she was married to. When her husband, Mayor Julian Vance, finally entered the room, the truth was already standing on its own. His presence didn't create justice. It revealed how rarely justice arrives without power backing it. That is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story. Too often, fairness depends on who is watching, who is recording, and who has the authority to make consequences unavoidable. The question isn't whether Elena deserved to be treated with respect she always did. The real question is why respect so often requires proof credentials or proximity to power before it is granted. The lesson here goes beyond race retail or a single viral incident. It's about understanding how everyday choices add up. When someone is dismissed for asking questions, when discomfort is labeled as threat, when silence feels safer than speaking up. These moments don't seem dramatic on their own, but together they form systems that punish dignity and reward bias. So how do we apply this to our own lives? First, question your assumptions. Who do you instinctively trust? Who do you doubt, and why? Second, value transparency over comfort. If a situation can't withstand scrutiny, that's not the fault of the person asking questions. Third, understand that real power doesn't shout. It documents. It prepares. It waits. And finally, remember, this prejudice is expensive. It costs trust, integrity, safety, and eventually accountability. The bill always comes due, sometimes quietly, sometimes all at once. If this story made you think, if it challenged you, or if it simply reminded you that dignity should never be conditional, then there are many more stories like this that deserve to be told. Subscribe to the channel to support the work, to keep these conversations going, and to help bring more thoughtful, powerful stories to light. Your support is what allows this kind of content to exist and to keep asking the questions that matter.